The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base shank like a knife through silk. Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper 6 Actual. We are compromised, I repeat, we are compromised. Multiple KIA, running low on ammunition. Request immediate extract, over. Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank Rodriguez pressed his headset closer to his ear, his weathered face creasing into deep lines of concern. The voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jake Iceman Morrison, leader of SEAL Team 6's Alpha Squad. Tank had worked with Morrison before. The man didn't rattle easily. If he was calling for help, the situation was beyond critical. Viper 6 Actual, this is base control. What's your 20? Tank's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up satellite feeds and troop movements across the mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. Grid reference 41 Sierra Papa Quebec 7729. We're pinned down in a valley approximately 12 clicks northwest of your position. Heavy Taliban presence, estimated 40 to 50 hostiles. They've got us surrounded and we've got wounded. Tank's blood ran cold. That grid reference was deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains, surrounded by peaks that scraped the belly of heaven itself. The terrain was so treacherous that helicopters couldn't navigate it safely, especially not in the pre-dawn darkness. Even in daylight, the swirling winds and jagged rock formations had claimed more aircraft than enemy fire ever had. Viper 6 Actual, stand by. Tank switched to the command frequency. Colonel Hendricks, we've got a situation. Colonel William Hendricks appeared at Tank's shoulder within minutes, his silver hair disheveled from sleep, but his blue eyes sharp and focused. He listened intently as Tank briefed him on Morrison's predicament, his jaw tightening with each detail. What assets do we have available? Hendricks asked, though they both already knew the answer would be grim. Tank pulled up the base's aircraft roster on his screen. 2 Apache helicopters were grounded for maintenance. The remaining Black Hawks were already committed to other operations across the theater. The F-16s stationed at Bagram were too fast and too heavily armed for a precision extraction in mountainous terrain filled with friendly forces. Sir, we've got one C-130 on the tarmac. Tell number 840208. But it's just a transport bird, no weapon systems, no. Who's the pilot? Tank hesitated for a moment, knowing the colonel's likely reaction. Captain Thorne, sir. Call sign Ghost. Colonel Hendricks' expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Captain Alina, Ghost, Thorne had been a topic of considerable debate since her arrival at FOB Shank 3 months ago. Some questioned whether a former commercial airline pilot had any business flying military operations in a combat zone. Others whispered that her unusual call sign stemmed from her ability to seemingly disappear from radar and reappear exactly where she needed to be, though they said it with more skepticism than admiration. The radio crackled again. Base control, this is Viper 6 Actual. We're taking heavy fire. Request immediate assistance. We've got multiple wounded and limited ammunition remaining. Alina Thorne stood in the briefing room 15 minutes later, her auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun, green eyes studying the tactical map spread across the metal table. She wore her flight suit with the same quiet confidence she brought to everything else. No swagger, no bravado, just the steady presence of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. The terrain's impossible, Captain Bulldog Martinez muttered from across the room, shaking his head. Those peaks create wind shears that'll tear an aircraft apart, and in the dark, it's suicide. Several other pilots nodded in agreement. The Hindu Kush had earned its reputation as an aircraft graveyard for good reason. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their jagged peaks creating unpredictable air currents that could slam a plane into the ground without warning. Alina traced her finger along the valley where Morrison's team was trapped. What's the weather report? Clear skies, minimal cloud cover, but winds are gusting up to 40 knots through the passes. Tank replied, pulling up the meteorological data. Visibility is good, but those crosswinds. The C-130 can handle crosswinds, Alina said quietly, her voice carrying a confidence that made several people in the room exchange glances. She's built for rough landings and short runways. The question isn't whether the aircraft can do it, it's whether we can get there fast enough. Colonel Hendricks studied her carefully. Captain, I need you to understand what you're volunteering for. This isn't a routine transport mission. You'll be flying into a hot LZ with no fighter escort, no close air support, and terrain that's claimed more experienced pilots than I care to count. Alina met his gaze steadily. Sir, with all due respect, those SEALs didn't volunteer to be trapped in that valley either. They need extraction, and we have an aircraft capable of providing it. Ghost, Major Thompson, the base's operations officer, interjected. That valley is barely wide enough for a C-130. The approach angle is going to be nearly vertical. You'll have maybe 30 seconds on the ground before you need to get airborne again, assuming you can even land without crashing into the mountainside. Alina nodded, acknowledging the risks without flinching. Then we'd better make those 30 seconds count. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system and the distant sound of generators. Everyone present understood the mathematics of the situation. A standard helicopter extraction was impossible due to the terrain and enemy fire. Fighter jets were useless for personnel recovery. The C-130 represented their only option, but it was an option that bordered on the impossible. Colonel Hendricks made his decision. Captain Thorne, you're authorized for immediate departure. Take whoever you need as crew. I'll need Staff Sergeant Williams as my loadmaster, Alina replied immediately, and Sergeant First Class Peterson as flight engineer. Both men stepped forward without hesitation, though Peterson looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The pre-flight preparations took exactly 18 minutes. Alina ran through her checklist with mechanical precision, her hands moving over controls and switches with the muscle memory of thousands of flight hours. The C-130 Hercules sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its 4 turboprop engines gleaming under the harsh floodlights. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams secured the cargo bay, ensuring every piece of medical equipment and stretcher was properly fastened. The loadmaster had worked with Alina on several previous missions and had developed a grudging respect for her abilities, even if he didn't understand her background. Ghost, you sure about this approach vector? Williams asked over the internal communications system as he completed his final checks. Alina studied the topographical map one more time, calculating wind speeds, approach angles, and the narrow window of opportunity they'd have for landing and takeoff. Negative on standard approach patterns, Marcus. We're going to come in from the northeast, following the ridgeline until the last possible moment. It'll mask our approach from the enemy positions and give us the best angle for the valley floor. Sergeant Peterson, monitoring the engines from his position, shook his head. That ridgeline approach puts us about 50 feet above the peaks. One miscalculation and we're decorating the mountainside. Then we don't miscalculate, Alina replied simply, starting the first engine. The familiar whine of the turboprop filled the cabin, followed quickly by the other 3 engines as they spooled up to operational power. The tower cleared them for immediate departure, and Alina taxied the massive aircraft toward the runway. Through her headset, she could hear the ongoing radio communications with Morrison's trapped team. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Viper 6 Actual, this is Ghost 77. We are airborne and inbound to your position. ETA 15 minutes. Prepare for emergency extraction, over. Morrison's voice crackled back through the static. Copy that, Ghost 77. Be advised, enemy forces have us surrounded. LZ is hot, repeat, LZ is hot. We'll mark our position with infrared strobes visible on NVGs only. Alina banked the C-130 northwest, climbing through the darkness toward the jagged silhouette of the Hindu Kush Mountains. The aircraft's navigation systems painted a picture of the terrain ahead, an unforgiving landscape of vertical rock faces and narrow valleys that had swallowed countless aircraft over the decades. The C-130 Hercules cut through the night sky with surprising grace for such a massive aircraft. Alina kept the plane at 12,000 feet as they approached the mountains, well above the effective range of small arms fire, but still low enough to navigate the treacherous peaks ahead. Through her night vision goggles, the landscape below appeared as a ghostly green tableau of impossible terrain. Ghost 77, this is Viper 6 actual. We've got movement on all ridgelines. Estimate 50+ hostiles converging on our position. We're running low on ammunition and have 3 wounded, 1 critical. Alina's jaw tightened as she processed Morrison's update. The enemy wasn't just holding their position. They were actively moving to eliminate the trapped SEALs before any rescue could arrive. Time was running out faster than she'd hoped. Copy that, Viper 6. We're beginning our approach now. Maintain your position and prepare for immediate extraction. Staff Sergeant Williams moved to the rear of the aircraft, lowering the cargo ramp partway to prepare for the fastest possible loading sequence. The wind howled through the opening, creating a deafening roar that mixed with the steady drone of the engines. Alina descended to 8,000 feet, then 6,000, threading the massive aircraft between peaks that rose like ancient monuments on either side. The turbulence increased dramatically as they dropped lower, the mountain winds grabbing at the C-130's wings and fuselage with invisible hands. Jesus Christ, Peterson muttered over the intercom as a particularly violent updraft lifted the aircraft nearly 200 feet in seconds. These mountains are trying to kill us. Stay focused, Alina replied calmly, making minute adjustments to her flight path as she navigated between the towering rock faces. Her instruments showed wind speeds fluctuating wildly, from dead calm to 60-knot gusts within seconds. Flying in these conditions required constant attention and lightning-fast reflexes. Through her night vision goggles, Alina spotted the valley where Morrison's team was trapped. It was a narrow slash between 2 enormous peaks, maybe 400 yards wide at its broadest point, and tapering to barely 200 yards where she'd need to land. The valley floor appeared to be relatively flat, but appearances could be deceiving in mountainous terrain. There, she announced to her crew, banking the aircraft slightly to give them a better view. Grid 41 Sierra Papa Quebec 7729, that's our LZ. Williams whistled low through his teeth. Ghost, that valley's barely wide enough for our wingspan. You sure we can fit? Alina was already calculating the approach. The C-130's wingspan was 132 feet. The valley was roughly 600 feet wide at the point where they'd touched down, giving them adequate clearance if she could maintain perfect alignment. The challenge would be the approach angle. She'd need to drop nearly vertically into the valley to avoid clipping the surrounding peaks. Viper 6 actual, this is Ghost 77. I have visual on your position. Prepare to mark your location with IR strobes. We're beginning our descent. Copy, Ghost 77. Be advised, we're taking sporadic fire from multiple directions. The LZ is not secure. Alina switched to her crew frequency. Gentlemen, we're going in. Marcus, I need that ramp ready for immediate loading. Peterson, monitor engine performance closely. We're going to need maximum power for takeoff. This is going to be fast and rough. The approach began at 4,000 feet above the valley floor. Alina rolled the C-130 into a steep dive, the aircraft's nose pointing almost directly downward as she aimed for the narrow opening between the peaks. The altimeter spun rapidly as they descended at over 3,000 feet per minute, far steeper than any normal approach profile. Altitude 2,000, Peterson called out, his voice tight with concentration. Alina pulled back on the controls, gradually leveling the aircraft as they approached the valley floor. The mountain walls flashed past on either side, so close she could make out individual rocks and crevices in the ancient stone. The margin for error was measured in feet, not hundreds of yards. 1,000, 500, 300. The C-130's landing gear touched the rocky valley floor with a bone-jarring impact that sent shockwaves through the entire aircraft. Alina immediately applied reverse thrust and maximum braking, fighting to bring the massive plane to a stop before they ran out of valley. They had landed in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by hostile forces and mountains that blocked any conventional escape route. But they were down, and Morrison's SEALs were still alive. The 30 seconds that followed would determine whether this rescue mission became a legend or a tragedy. Alina kept the engines running as the C-130 rolled to a stop roughly two-thirds of the way down the narrow valley. Through the green glow of her night vision, she could see muzzle flashes sparkling along the ridgelines on both sides. The enemy forces Morrison had warned about were definitely present and definitely hostile. "Ramp down," she called to Williams, who immediately lowered the cargo ramp fully. The loadmaster grabbed his M4 carbine and took position at the ramp, scanning for threats while providing cover for the approaching SEALs. Morrison's team appeared out of the darkness like ghosts, moving in a tight formation despite their wounded. The SEAL commander himself was supporting a teammate who'd taken a bullet through the thigh, while two other team members carried an unconscious soldier on an improvised stretcher. "Move, move, move," Williams shouted over the engine noise, waving the SEALs toward the aircraft. Incoming rifle fire sparked off the rocky ground around them, the enemy forces having spotted the C-130's position. Alina watched her mirrors and instruments carefully, ready to begin their takeoff roll the instant Williams gave the all-clear. The valley stretched ahead of them for maybe 800 yards before ending in a wall of solid granite that rose straight up for thousands of feet. "All aboard," Williams reported as the last SEAL stumbled up the ramp. "We're loaded." "Ramp up, hold on." Alina pushed the throttles to maximum power before Williams had even finished securing the cargo bay. The four turboprop engines screamed as they spooled up to full military power, and the C-130 began rolling forward with agonizing slowness, gradually building speed on the rough valley floor. 300 yards, 400, 500. The mountain wall ahead grew larger and more imposing with each second. Alina watched her airspeed indicator climb slowly, 60 knots, 70, 80. They needed at least 90 knots before she could attempt to pull the aircraft off the ground, and preferably closer to 100 for a safe takeoff margin. Enemy fire intensified as they accelerated down the valley. Several rounds struck the aircraft's fuselage with metallic pings, but the C-130 was built to withstand significant battle damage. Alina forced herself to ignore the incoming fire and focus entirely on her instruments and the shrinking distance to the granite wall. 85 knots, 90, 95. "Come on," Peterson muttered, monitoring the engines as they operated at maximum continuous power. "Come on, you beautiful bird." At 98 knots, with less than 200 yards remaining before impact, Alina pulled back on the controls. The C-130 lifted off the valley floor with barely 50 feet to spare, its landing gear nearly brushing the tops of scattered boulders as it climbed at maximum angle. But they weren't clear yet. The valley walls rose on both sides, creating a natural funnel that seemed to narrow with each second of their climb. Alina banked hard left, then immediately right, following the valley's serpentine path as it wound between the towering peaks. "Jesus Ghost," Williams called over the intercom, "you're threading the needle here." Alina said nothing, entirely focused on the impossible navigation challenge ahead. The valley twisted and turned like a snake, and she had to anticipate each curve perfectly to avoid clipping the C-130's wings or tail against the mountain walls. At 2,000 feet above the valley floor, The mountains finally began to fall away, giving them room to maneuver. Alina banked south toward friendly airspace, climbing steadily as the immediate threat of the peaks diminished. Viper 6 actual to Ghost 77, Morrison's voice came through her headset, now speaking from the cargo bay behind her. Outstanding flying, Captain. Outstanding. You just saved 6 lives tonight. Alina keyed her microphone briefly. Just doing my job, Commander. How are your wounded? We'll make it thanks to you. That was the most incredible piece of flying I've ever seen. As they climbed through 8,000 feet, heading back toward Fob Shank, Alina allowed herself a small smile. The mission had been a success, but more importantly, good people were going home alive who might not have otherwise. Behind her, Staff Sergeant Williams was already working with the SEALs to treat their wounded teammates. The unconscious soldier had regained consciousness during the flight and would require immediate medical attention upon landing, but his vital signs were stable. Ghost 77, this is base control, Tank's familiar voice crackled through her headset. We show you airborne and heading home. What's your status? Base control, Ghost 77. Mission accomplished. We have 6 souls on board, 3 wounded requiring immediate medical attention upon arrival. ETA to base 22 minutes. Copy that, Ghost 77. Medical team is standing by. The flight back to Fob Shank passed in relative quiet, the adrenaline of the rescue gradually giving way to the steady routine of normal flight operations. Alina ran through her post-mission checklist, ensuring all aircraft systems were functioning normally after their harrowing journey through the mountains. As they approached the base, Alina could see the runway lights stretching across the desert like a string of pearls. After the claustrophobic confines of the mountain valley, the open airspace around the base felt almost luxuriously spacious. She brought the C-130 in for a textbook landing, the aircraft touching down with barely a bump despite the challenging mission they'd just completed. As they taxied toward the ramp, Alina could see ambulances and medical personnel already positioning themselves for the wounded SEALs. Colonel Hendricks was waiting on the tarmac when they shut down engines. He watched as the wounded SEALs were carefully transferred to stretchers and loaded into the waiting ambulances, his expression grim but satisfied. Morrison approached Alina as she completed her post-flight inspection, still wearing his combat gear but moving with obvious exhaustion. "Captain Thorne," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you a debt I can never repay. What you did tonight. It was impossible, but you did it anyway." Alina shook his hand firmly. "I'm just glad everyone made it home, Commander." "That flying back there," Morrison continued, "I've never seen anything like it, threading that valley in complete darkness with enemy fire coming from all directions. How did you know you could make it?" Alina considered the question for a moment. "I didn't know, Commander, but sometimes you have to attempt the impossible because the alternative is unacceptable." Colonel Hendricks approached them, having overheard the conversation. "Captain Thorne, I need to debrief you on this mission. There are going to be questions from higher up the chain of command about what happened tonight." "Of course, sir." As they walked toward the operations building, Hendricks glanced at Alina with something that might have been newfound respect. "That was extraordinary flying, Captain. I've seen a lot of pilots in my career, but what you did tonight was beyond exceptional." Alina nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and tonight's actions had spoken volumes about her capabilities as a pilot. The debriefing lasted 2 hours, with Alina providing detailed accounts of their approach, landing, and extraction procedures. Colonel Hendricks took copious notes, already anticipating the questions that would come from Theater Command about the unconventional rescue mission. "One more question," Hendricks said as they concluded the session. "That call sign of yours, Ghost, how did you earn it?" Alina was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. It started back in commercial aviation, sir. I had a reputation for finding ways through weather that other pilots couldn't navigate. Storms, fog, crosswinds, situations where aircraft would disappear from radar only to reappear exactly where they needed to be. And in military aviation, same principle, different environment. Sometimes the mission requires you to disappear until the moment you're needed most. Hendricks nodded slowly, beginning to understand the depth of capability he'd been overlooking. Well, Ghost, after tonight's mission, I suspect that call sign is going to carry a very different kind of respect around here. As Alina walked back to her quarters in the pre-dawn darkness, she reflected on the events of the night. The rescue mission had been successful, but she knew it would also change how she was perceived by the other pilots and crew members on base. Word of the mountain extraction spread through Fob Shank like wildfire over the next few days. The story grew with each telling: Alina's impossible navigation through the peaks, the precision landing in the narrow valley, the harrowing takeoff under enemy fire. What had started as skepticism about the civilian pilot gradually transformed into something approaching awe. Captain Martinez was the first to approach her directly. "Ghost," he said, finding her in the pilot's lounge 3 days after the mission, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about that mountain extraction. Hell, I was wrong about you." Alina looked up from the technical manual she'd been reading. "No apology necessary, Bulldog. Those mountains are dangerous for anyone." "Maybe so, but you made it look routine. Where did you learn to fly like that?" Alina closed the manual and leaned back in her chair. 12 years of commercial aviation, mostly international routes through difficult terrain. I've flown through the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, places where the weather and geography don't give you second chances. Martinez sat down across from her. "But this is different. Combat flying, enemy fire, split-second decisions with lives on the line. That's not something you learn in civilian aviation." "You're right," Alina agreed. "But the fundamentals are the same. Aircraft performance, weather evaluation, risk assessment. The stakes are higher here, but the physics of flight don't change." What Alina didn't tell Martinez was the complete story of her background. Before transitioning to commercial aviation, she'd spent 6 years as a military pilot herself, flying C-130s on missions very similar to the SEAL extraction. Her civilian experience had been valuable, but it was her original military training that had made the mountain rescue possible. She'd left military service after a mission had gone wrong, not due to any failure on her part, but because of command decisions that had resulted in unnecessary casualties. The transition to commercial aviation had been her way of stepping back from the life-and-death decisions that military flying demanded. But life had a way of bringing you back to where you belonged, and Alina was beginning to realize that her place was here, in the cockpit of a military transport, making the impossible flights that brought people home safely. The wounded SEALs had all recovered successfully. The soldier who'd been unconscious during the extraction had suffered a severe concussion, but was expected to make a full recovery. The others had been treated for various injuries and were already back on light duty. Morrison had put Alina in for a commendation, describing her flying as beyond the call of duty and demonstrating exceptional skill under extreme conditions. Colonel Hendricks had endorsed the recommendation enthusiastically. But for Alina, the real reward was simpler. 6 good people had gone home alive who might not have otherwise. In the end, that was what mattered most. 2 weeks after the mountain extraction, Alina received new orders. She was being transferred to a special operations aviation unit that conducted the military's most challenging rescue and transport missions. The assignment was voluntary, but her commanding officer strongly recommended she accept. "This is what you were meant to do, Ghost," Colonel Hendricks told her during their final meeting. "I've never seen flying like what you demonstrated that night. That kind of skill shouldn't be wasted on routine transport missions. Alina considered the offer carefully. Special operations would mean more dangerous missions, more nights like the mountain extraction, more situations where lives hung in the balance based on her decisions and abilities. It also meant returning fully to the military culture she'd stepped away from years earlier. The camaraderie, the shared purpose, the knowledge that every mission mattered in ways both large and small. "I'll accept the assignment, sir." Hendricks smiled. "I thought you might. Your replacement will be here next week to transition your current responsibilities. You'll deploy to your new unit the following Monday." As Alina prepared for her new assignment, she reflected on how much had changed since that night in the Hindu Kush Mountains. She'd arrived at Fob Shank as an outsider, viewed with suspicion by pilots who questioned whether civilian experience translated to military operations. Now she was leaving as something different, a pilot whose capabilities had been proven under the most demanding conditions possible. The call sign Ghost had taken on new meaning, representing not just her ability to navigate difficult conditions, but her capacity to appear exactly when and where she was needed most. Her final flight from Fob Shank was a routine supply run to Kandahar, nothing like the dramatic mountain extraction that had changed everything. But as the C-130 climbed into the clear Afghan sky, Alina felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. She was going back to where she belonged, to the missions that mattered most, to the flying that saved lives and brought people home safely. The mountains of Afghanistan had tested her abilities and reminded her of who she really was. Ghost was back where she belonged, ready for whatever impossible mission came next. The Special Operations Aviation Unit Alina joined was based at a classified location that officially didn't exist on any military maps. The pilots and crew members assigned there represented the best of the best, individuals selected for their exceptional skills and their ability to complete missions that conventional aviation units couldn't attempt. Alina's reputation had preceded her. The story of the mountain extraction had become something of a legend within special operations circles, growing in scope and drama with each retelling. By the time she reported for duty, some versions had her landing on a mountainside barely wider than the aircraft itself, while under heavy machine gun fire. Commander Sarah Reaper Jackson, the unit's commanding officer, set the record straight during Alina's initial briefing. "Forget whatever stories you've heard about Ghost's mountain flying," she announced to the assembled pilots. "I've read the after-action reports, reviewed the flight data, and debriefed the SEALs who were extracted. What Captain Thorne accomplished was extraordinary, but it was also precise, calculated, and professional. That's the standard we maintain here." Alina appreciated the commander's approach. Legends were entertaining, but successful special operations required realistic assessments of capabilities and limitations. Her first mission with the unit came 3 weeks after her arrival. Intelligence had identified a downed fighter pilot in hostile territory, approximately 40 miles behind enemy lines in a region controlled by a particularly aggressive insurgent group. "The pilot is alive but injured," Commander Jackson briefed the rescue team. "He's managed to evade capture for 36 hours, but enemy forces are closing in on his position. We have maybe a 4-hour window before they find him." The terrain was mountainous again, though not as extreme as the Hindu Kush. The main challenge would be the enemy presence. Satellite intelligence showed significant troop movements in the area, suggesting the insurgents were actively hunting for the downed pilot. Alina studied the mission parameters carefully. "What's the extraction plan?" "Fast rope insertion of a rescue team, secure the pilot, then extract via helicopter," replied Major Hawk Thompson, the mission commander. "Your job is to provide close air support and coordination during the extraction." Alina nodded, but something about the plan bothered her. Fast rope operations were inherently risky, especially in mountainous terrain with an active enemy presence. The rescue helicopters would be vulnerable during the insertion and extraction phases. "Commander," she said carefully, "has anyone considered a direct landing extraction?" The briefing room fell quiet. Major Thompson looked skeptical. "Ghost, the LZ is on a ridgeline with maybe 50 yards of flat space. No helicopter can land there safely." "I wasn't thinking about helicopters." Commander Jackson studied Alina with interest. "You're suggesting a C-130 landing on a mountain ridge." The topographical data shows a relatively flat area approximately 200 yards long by 40 yards wide. It's rough terrain, but within the C-130's landing parameters if approached correctly. Thompson shook his head. Even if the aircraft could physically land there, the tactical situation makes it impossible. That ridge is completely exposed. Enemy forces would have clear lines of sight from multiple directions. "Which is exactly why they won't expect it," Alina replied. "A helicopter insertion takes time, rope deployment, team insertion, securing the pilot, extraction. We're talking about 15 to 20 minutes of exposure. A C-130 landing would put us on the ground for maybe 90 seconds." Commander Jackson considered the proposal. "Walk me through it, Ghost." Alina moved to the map display. "High-speed approach from the southwest, following this valley system to mask our approach. We come over the ridge at minimum altitude and maximum speed, then execute an assault landing directly on the target area. The pilot should be in this grid square here, approximately 200 yards from the potential LZ. And takeoff. Short field takeoff to the northeast, following the terrain down into this valley system before climbing to safe altitude." The plan was unconventional, bordering on reckless. But as Alina outlined the approach and extraction procedures, it began to make tactical sense. The element of surprise would be absolute. No enemy force would anticipate a large transport aircraft landing directly on a mountaintop. Major Thompson remained skeptical. "Ghost, you're talking about landing a 155,000-pound aircraft on unimproved terrain at 7,000 feet above sea level. The margin for error is essentially zero." "The margin for error is always zero in special operations," Alina replied quietly. "The question is whether the risk is justified by the potential to save a life." Commander Jackson made the decision. "We'll go with Ghost's plan. Hawk, you'll lead a 4-man team for the actual pilot recovery. Ghost will provide the aircraft and crew. Launch in 2 hours." As the briefing broke up, Alina felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and focused concentration that preceded difficult missions. The mountain ridge landing would be challenging, but not impossible. The key would be precise navigation and split-second timing during the approach and landing phases. Her crew for this mission included Flight Engineer Staff Sergeant Mike Wrench Rodriguez and Loadmaster Sergeant First Class Danny Cargo Williams, both experienced special operations personnel who'd worked dozens of high-risk missions. "Ghost," Rodriguez said as they conducted pre-flight inspections, "I've seen you fly, and I trust your abilities completely. But this ridge landing, are you absolutely certain about the approach vector?" Alina pointed to the aerial photographs spread across her navigation table. "Look at the terrain features here. This ridgeline runs almost perfectly northeast-southwest, which gives us a natural approach corridor. The prevailing winds in this region blow from the west, so we'll have a slight headwind component for both landing and takeoff." Williams examined the photos more closely. "What about obstacles, trees, rocks, drop-offs?" Satellite imagery shows scattered vegetation and rock outcroppings, but nothing that should interfere with our landing roll. The main concern is the surface composition. We won't know if it's solid enough to support the aircraft's weight until we're actually on the ground. The C-130 took off into clear skies, climbing rapidly to cruising altitude before turning toward the target area. Alina used the flight time to review every aspect of the planned approach, mentally rehearsing each phase of the challenging landing ahead. Major Thompson and his rescue team occupied the cargo bay, conducting final equipment checks and reviewing their procedures for securing the downed pilot. The plan called for them to deploy immediately upon landing, locate and secure the pilot, then return to the aircraft within 60 seconds. It was an ambitious timeline, but special operations demanded ambitious timelines. The longer they remained on the ground, the greater the risk of enemy engagement. As they approached the target area, Alina began her descent to nap-of-the-earth altitude, following valleys and ridgelines to avoid detection by enemy radar systems. The mountainous terrain flashed past below them, a rugged landscape of peaks and valleys that had challenged aviators for generations. "Target ridge in sight," she announced to her crew. Through the cockpit windscreen, the landing area appeared as a thin line of relatively flat terrain perched atop a narrow mountain ridge. It looked impossibly small for a C-130 landing, but Alina had successfully landed in smaller spaces. The approach required absolute precision. Too high and they'd overshoot the ridge entirely. Too low and they'd impact the mountainside. The margin for error was measured in feet, not hundreds of yards. Alina lined up her approach, configuring the aircraft for maximum deceleration upon landing. Flaps full, landing gear extended, propellers set for reverse thrust immediately upon touchdown. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet. The C-130 flared over the ridge and settled onto the rocky terrain with a jarring impact that rattled every rivet in the airframe. Alina immediately applied maximum braking and reverse thrust, fighting to bring the massive aircraft to a stop before they ran out of ridge. They stopped with less than 30 yards to spare. "Go, go, go," Thompson shouted as the cargo ramp lowered. His team sprinted from the aircraft toward the pilot's last known position, moving with the practiced efficiency of countless training exercises. Alina kept the engines running, ready for immediate takeoff. Through her side window, she could see enemy muzzle flashes beginning to appear on surrounding ridgelines as hostile forces reacted to the aircraft's sudden appearance. "Pilot secured," Thompson's voice crackled through her headset. "We're coming back." The rescue team appeared at the cargo ramp 90 seconds after they'd departed, carrying the injured fighter pilot between them. He was conscious but clearly in pain, his flight suit torn and bloodied from his ordeal in the mountains. "All aboard," Williams reported as the team secured the pilot and themselves in the cargo bay. Alina released the brakes and pushed the throttles to maximum power. The C-130 accelerated down the ridge, building speed slowly on the rough terrain. At the end of the ridgeline, they dropped into the valley beyond like a stone, Alina using the terrain to build airspeed before beginning their climb to safety. Enemy fire sparked around them as they descended into the valley, but the C-130's speed and the element of surprise worked in their favor. Within minutes, they were climbing through safe altitude with the rescued pilot aboard. "Outstanding work, Ghost," Commander Jackson's voice came through the radio. "Mission accomplished. RTB immediately for medical attention to the pilot." As they flew back toward base, Alina reflected on the successful rescue. The ridge landing had been technically challenging, but